One of the things that, we've been toying with different people around us, and one of the speakers at the Symbolic World Summit, Cale Zeldin, talked about this, which is in some ways the possibility of a return of epic form. Because what you see in epic form is, on the one hand, you see something that has sincerity, which is already a big deal, like something that isn't ironic, that isn't always kind of just constantly trying
Snarky.
to be smart, to be smart about it, like that there is a kind of sincerity about it, but that it also has a subtlety in it. So if you obviously people who know that if you read the Iliad, you can read it from the point of view of the Greeks, but you also can read it from the point of view of the Trojans, and you can kind of sympathize with both sides. You can kind of understand that, and I think that this has been, even like in terms of American mythology in the Western, this has been, it's one of the possibilities, which is to have a story where you have, let's say, people going out west and encountering native people, but then you can understand both of their positions. Like you can see that there are good people on both sides, there are bad people on both sides. You kind of see a full human drama being played out. You can still understand why they have to fight. Like you can get that. But it seems like that, to me, would be an interesting way to go in terms of storytelling, is to bring back a fuller story, one that isn't just one side or the other in terms of its, and also isn't just ironic. This is Jonathan Peugeot. Welcome to the Symbolic World. Hello, everyone. I am here with Gregg Hurwitz. I think most people on my channel know him. Gregg has become a good friend of mine. He is a best-selling writer. He's written several books. He's written comics. He's written Batman, for goodness sake. And so his new book is called Antihero. And I have it here. It's been out for a little while, and we actually tried to record this, but we had some technical problems, so I'm happy to be able to record it. And it's a very different take on his hero, and so I'm looking forward to talking to Gregg about where he is in his writing, but also where he is in his life. So, Gregg, thanks for talking to me.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again.
And so Antihero is, we've been writing back and forth about it because, as some people know or may not know, one of the main characters in the book is a young Orthodox woman who, encounters some serious abuse, and now she has to deal with a assassin. Our nowhere man, the Orphan X, who is the main character of the book, and everything is very different. It's very different than the other books, and we felt that already in the last book that you wrote just before, that there was something happening in the character. And so, tell us a little bit about the book first of all, and also what's going on in your head to move in these directions.
That's a more complicated question, the latter. I will say, so I've been writing Orphan X. This is the 11th book in the series. The last one, called Nemesis, was the 10th book. And things have started to change with this character. One of my friends is Lee Child, who writes the brilliant Jack Reacher series. And Lee always says that each book, each installment is the same, and the character stays the same largely. And part of his genius is that he does that every time so compellingly. But for me, with Orphan X, he changes, and he's growing, and he's becoming more human across the series. He's a kid who was taken out of a foster home at the age of 12 and trained to be an assassin from a dark shadow program in the Department of Defense called the Orphan Program, where they took these kids who, if they go get killed, doing an assassination somewhere, by the time they're trained up, no one's going to miss them and no one's going to come looking for them. And so when Evan was 12 and began his training, his handler became like a father figure to him. And he told him the hard part isn't making you a killer. The hard part is keeping you human. And the series has been this movement for this kind of archetypal thriller hero into more and more humanity. And one of the things that happens in this book, in Antihero, that's extraordinarily different is there's a young woman who is brutally assaulted by a pack of real nihilistic young men. They grab her off a subway in New York. And she calls Evan, as people do. Now Evan has left the program. He's the nowhere man. People call him who are in desperate need, and he goes to help them. And he arrives to help her, and he needs to pursue these young men, this pack of young kind of nihilists who have been radicalized online. But he doesn't realize till he gets there that this young woman is an Orthodox Christian. And she makes him a vow that he won't kill anybody extrajudicially as he's going to pursue and hunt down these men. And so here you have the greatest assassin of this or any generation going into a mission with both of his hands tied behind his back. He can't kill anybody. It's incredibly dangerous. He might get killed. And the question of Antihero really is, can he integrate this higher ethic and survive it? Can he do right by the wishes that she has, which hold him to a higher standard? And is that ethic something he's going to integrate within himself? Or is it something that he's going to snap and, leave a high body count as he has in the preceding 10 books?
Yeah, which is something people have to understand, that usually he just goes into a place and just kills everyone in the room. Like, basically, when he leaves the building, there's just no one left. It's kind of like it is similar. There's something similar to John Wick in that sense, where he just goes in and just shoots everyone.
One of the John Wick movies, it's funny you say that, quoted from Orphan X, which was really interesting. They said the assassin's credo, how you do anything is how you do everything. And that's the second commandment of Evan's 10 commandments that are his replacement for clearly a higher ethic and a different set of 10 commandments. His 10 assassins commandments.
Yeah, and he does it, but Orphan X does it always to help someone who can't get help from the system. For some reason, the police can't help them. They're stuck in a situation that makes it impossible. And so in this case, it's funny because you realize that it's actually harder for him not to kill people than it is to actually just kill them. And it's funny because it makes the book so interesting because you've also been following this character forever and you've enjoyed watching him, like the classic, telling the person what he's going to do and then just doing it. And there's nothing you can do to stop him because he's so good at what he does. But then now having to figure out how to stop these guys without killing them. There's some scene where he comes right up, and he could totally kill him. He leaves her in this horrible situation. He comes back and gives them, a little bit more air to breathe or like a little bit more to just, let them survive. I really enjoyed the book. And also I thought, that you were able to portray this character, the Orthodox woman, as someone who was both very feminine in her sensibilities, wasn't like just some silly girl boss, but was also very strong, and you really see her strength of character kind of shine through. And then sometimes, kind of shame even Evan in some moments where it's like her virtue was so strong that he didn't even know how to react to that. So I thought I think you also said that you've also had people write you about this.
Well, it's been really nice. I mean, I don't think we're not suffering from a surfeit of, nuanced portrayal of Christians in mass popular culture. And I think it might even be less for Orthodox Christians. And, I didn't know a lot about Orthodox Christianity till I met you. I mean, that's one of the reasons why the book is dedicated to you. You and we've had so many conversations in addition to the 40 hours live on air at the Daily Wire. But I think our private conversations have dwarfed that in terms of time. And there's something about the faith and about orthodoxy that's very, very interesting to me and very different. I'm more familiar, though I'm Jewish, I'm much more familiar with Catholicism because I went to a Jesuit high school, evangelicalism because I'm American. And so, there's something in Orthodox Christianity that I find so compelling and kind of like, I like the muscularity of it, the ritual, the emphasis on sort of action in the real world. I like the ways that the holy's contained in, within the church, that like heaven is right within the church and it's designed as opposed to the Gothic spires that aim upward towards heaven, that it's something that can be contained around and in reality at all times. And so I just thought, here's this character I wanted to write and not make her like a strong woman. I find that really annoying. We don't talk about writing strong man. I want to make her complicated. I want to make her human. And there were aspects of her that were amazing for me to write and to explore and have her sort of like shine like a light through Evan to illuminate all these different facets. Like she says, who do you answer to when they first meet? And he says, no one. And she says, a man who answers to no one is very, very dangerous. I mean, like, it's a completely different set of questions because most people are like in a horrible life or death situation and just want his help and protection. And she's worried about other things.
Yeah,
And so
yeah, yeah.
it's a very interesting thing to integrate into a mainstream thriller.
Yeah, and it's also I think that, you know, one of the things that's happened, at least in my experience in reading the books as they move forward is, you know, there's also a more and more of a dwelling on these moments of human weakness or human vulnerability, so it obviously at the beginning of the series, Evan is just like a cold assassin who clearly has a moral vein. Like there's something in him that's driving him to do good, but he's doing this and he struggles to even deal with people's humanity. Like every time he encounters like a normal person, he's just struggling so much. And so it's just been amazing to see the characters change from these even his impression of people change through the books, like through action. I mean, you never say, well, this is what he's going through. You just see him being able to deal with human problems more and more as the books go forward.
Well, one of the things I say in the books is that, he was drown proofed. He was taught hand-to-hand combat. He knows how to snipe. He knows demolition breaching. He knows foreign etiquette and, all the things he needs to survive, but he was never taught the strange human language of intimacy. And so much of that is he becomes more human, which is really what the books are. It's an 11 right now. It's an 11 book series about somebody trying to figure out how to become more human. And as that happens, as he becomes more human, it means that the people around him become more human. And it means the people he helps become more human. And ultimately what that means is even the people who he's going after, who are villains or antagonists, have to be more human also. And so it's this very intricate process of him incorporating more and more notions of that, as opposed to his black and white assassin's world that we meet him in the first book, which is called Orphan X, where he's very much a lone wolf and he operates by these black and white principles. And the first book is the process of basically all 10 of his assassin's commandments he has to break. It's right at the point I start the series almost like when he realizes that he is an archetypal thriller hero himself. He realizes he's Pinocchio, but he wants to be a real boy. And he starts that journey, and that journey takes a huge step in Antihero.
Yeah, and in the last book, Nemesis, I think the thing that also surprised me the most is how all of a sudden, for the first time in the series of books, you suddenly feel some compassion for the people that he's going to kill. And the way that it was written, you're reading it sometimes, you're like, no, stop, Evan, stop. Like, no, no, no. And you're kind of, you're projecting yourself in in the character that he's going after, even though that those characters are kind of horrible people, just like similar to the others in the other books. And then in this book, you kind of take this one step more, which is, kind of forcing Evan to ask bigger questions about what it is he's doing. So yeah, it's really been great to follow that arc there.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's been really fun to write. And, I knew the arc and the direction it's headed, but one thing that's funny is I couldn't have written this book, first, second, third, fourth, fifth in the series, because I don't think I knew enough. Writing for me is the best form of thinking. And so I'm writing these books and I'm learning a lot. And as I'm putting it down on paper, what I'm doing and exploring with him informs me and my life, and what happens in my life is informing this. And so it's been really amazing to grow up with this character across a decade. And, but like the fourth book in the series, called Out of the Dark, for instance, is my homage to Day of the Jackal. It's like he goes after to try to assassinate a very corrupt, president of the United States. It's this big Frederick Forsyth action or thriller. And so like I couldn't write that book now, just like I couldn't have written Antihero then. So it's a very interesting thing for me now looking back. This is I think it's my 27th novel. I've been at this.
Wow.
I started my first book, I was 19. But it's very interesting to start to contemplate that now as, if I'm fortunate, the halfway point of my life, if I have enough tread on the tires still, but to start to contemplate about the ways that I'm changing and learning. And a lot of that is in the writing itself that then changes what it is that I want to write and what themes I'm going to explore and what things I want to put into the world.
Yeah, maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, because I know that when you started this series, I think when you were around 40, right? It was kind of like going through that kind of midlife crisis was starting, and this was a way to kind of work through some of the issues. And so what have you learned, over these
Well,
past years?
so I'm 52 now, and but turning 50 for me was great. Turning 40 was murder for me. My wife was in between. She'd been diagnosed with, um, for lack of a better word, a brain tumor. It was a cavernous hemangioma, and the surgery was like delayed and rescheduled, and it was right around the cusp of it being delayed and rescheduled that I turned 40. And that, in combination with a lot of other things, just I was not in great shape through that period. I think I had a lot of my views and handles on the narratives of the world. I remember thinking, like, so this is it. I'm going to write another 30 novels and 80 comics and 20 scripts, and then that's it. Like, I just do this over again. And I think in a lot of ways, in hindsight, I was hatching out of this awareness of myself as, I tend to think in Jungian terms, as you and I talk about a lot, but like this sort of archetype of being a striving young man. And I think all of that was up. A lot of my worst parts were up and starting to fall away. And so it's very interesting that what I chose to write at the time fictionally, or what chose me, because it's not like I'm thinking this and doing, you know, eh, math on an abacus about emotional and psychological things I'm going through. Like, all that happens with me is a story starts to occur and I start
Mhm.
to, masticate on it. But, it is telling that the story begins at the point, I think, when most thriller series end. Most thriller series end with kind of a shadow integrated hero who's killing people for good or solving cases for good. And
Mhm.
mine starts right at the point where every rule, his 10 Assassin's Commandments, every rule he had in the world is broken, and he has to kind of shatter through into a new definition of himself, which means being in the world differently. I think
Mhm.
that's very much what I was going through at that time, which makes sense in hindsight. Though
Mhm.
I didn't know it through the writing. And at some point in working on the series, I think I caught up more and more through earlier in my life. When I wrote a book, I'd finish it and I'd look back and think, oh, like I wrote a book called You're Next. And I look back on that and thought, oh, that was about me contending with the feeling I have of like increased intense vulnerability over being a parent. Like, I could
Mhm.
finish a book and then understand it. And so that started with Orphan X. And then there came a time that I was understanding it as I was writing it. It's almost like I caught up to the creative process and it became a different sort of feedback loop. And so the writing for me the experience of it has deepened a lot for me in real time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
This is Sarah from Hamilton. The imagery of Isaiah is overwhelming. Fire, stone, seed, life and death. What does it have to do with Christ? Join me for my course, The Fifth Gospel, to discover how to read Isaiah in terms of its native language, symbolism. When we read that language along the textual structure of the book, we find the story of Christ, the God who became man to elevate man to divine glory. And we find that story both in Isaiah's most famous passages and in his most obscure ones. The course starts on June 15th and can be attended live or at your convenience. I hope to see you there.
And I mean, I dare to ask you this, but in terms of maybe your own faith, because you have this character that has faith in the novel, and you're not explicitly a Christian, but has writing a character like this or coming to a character like this, has it affected your own vision of that?
Oh yeah. I mean, I wouldn't have, a lot of that came too. I mean, I had a bunch of revelations. I mean, not to lean too heavily on the plural noun, but I had a lot of realizations, let's say, when we were doing Exodus, that
Mm.
were pretty life altering for me. I mean, that was and I didn't want to go to do that seminar. That wasn't something I was hot to do, nor were they particularly hot to host me. I found out
You-
later. They were very worried about having this, like, more
California.
liberal inclined Hollywood Jew showing up in the middle of the Exodus seminar. And they weren't sure how it was going to go. But of course, I was friends with you. I was friends with Blackwood. Jordan and I go back forever. But that was an incredibly shifting experience for me, where I was not just with myself, but in viewing the world and in viewing the politics and the culture, which I'd been engaged with to some extent. So a lot of things shifted in there for me, and I think I'm writing towards that to figure out more and more of what I'm thinking. It's the best way for me to wrestle with it is in story.
Yeah. And I can tell because you have that just behind you. You have that picture of the Exodus guys, right?
Oh yeah, there we are.
There you are.
Um, did you have a big revelation for you that came, or a different kind of realization that came out of Exodus? Like, how did that impact you most meaningfully?
Um, it's weird because I do think that the thing that impacted me the most about it was the way in which we all kind of came together. I think that that was the thing that touched me the most because I remember thinking similar to you or similar to them sitting at the table at the beginning and looking at all the people there and thinking, man, we are a ragtag bunch of people right here. This is not like a normal, like there's no theologian, there's no expert on the Bible. It's just
We didn't have a
Jordan.
Catholic, did we, for Exodus?
No, we didn't have a Catholic doing Exodus, and it was like there was, and it was like Jordan's friends basically, and so I thought, how is this going to go? But I thought when everything kind of started coming together, and we started to discern everybody's goodwill, you could say, of all the
Yes.
goodwill of the people that were there. I think that really fed a lot into it. And like you said, what happened out of that is friendships that were very surprising that have continued until today. And so I was really and I when we did the gospel seminar, I was looking forward to it. I was like, all right, I'm going to see these people again, and people that I care about and then I trust, and the people that were added in the gospel seminar were great as well. So that's really what I got out of it, I would say.
Huh.
I live in this world of, I kind of come out of this world that's more isolated because I'm an icon carver. I lived in these very Christian circles, and in some ways, I'm the opposite of you, right? Because I live in the more hermetic kind of Christian circles, writing about Christian symbolism, about icons and everything. And then all of a sudden, because of my friendship with Jordan, I got tossed into a world that I had nothing to do. Like, without Jordan, I don't think I could have been friends with you. Like it was, he kind of put me in this situation where now I'm meeting people that I would never meet. And that's been to me very kind of enriching. And it's been great to kind of open up my perception and my capacity to interact with all kinds of people. And then for you, it's the opposite. It's like you're coming out of like writing, Batman and thrillers for Hollywood, and then you're sent into this Bible world all of a sudden.
It's funny. Yeah. I mean, I done, I certainly grew up in different religious communities. I mean, I think I've never been immersed that fully. I mean, going to Jesuit high school was fairly serious in a lot of ways, but I mean, that was an amazing experience. I think it's really testament to Jordan too, how well those things went. I think it would have been impossible for anybody else to kind of play Sorcerer Mickey at that table, but also to the character of everybody there. I think one of the things that really solidified for me that was very interesting was, I feel like I'm still an old-fashioned classical liberal. I don't feel like I moved. I feel like everybody else moved, further and further and further left in ways that to me are unrecognizable. But one of the things that was very interesting for me being there and talking about these foundational stories was I had this realization of like, right, I am definitely part of the fringe. And for the fringe to exist, let alone thrive, the center has to hold in certain ways. And so I had a lot of newfound, I think, humility for understanding as I was, because I've been engaged somewhat in politics, as some of this. I've been trying to pull liberals back from the far left, and I've been trying to pull, parties in the culture across left and right and get people to talk. I think that an actual liberal is handshake distance across the aisle from an actual conservative, right? There's all ways that we need to hold together. But I really had a significant appreciation for how these foundational stories pour the groundwork, lay the groundwork for the kind of work that I do, the kind of life that I lead, all these other things. And so that was sort of a very interesting experience. And in certain ways, I think I've been exploring that a bit in the last couple Orphan X books as part of his evolution. It's funny you talk about how diverse we were, because I was laughing when we first got there. I was thinking, it was sort of still close to peak wokeism. It was funny because in my head, I was like, gosh, I'm going to hear from all these angry Hollywood, whatever, progressives be like, oh, great, like another panel of a bunch of like white men. I was thinking, if you had any idea how rangy like this crew is. It's really funny, of how many different viewpoints are represented and all the intricacy and nuance. And it's a good starting point, to have that sort of range and not like an insane range where nothing gets done.
Yeah, but I think it was really the goodwill of people
Yeah.
that made the difference, because obviously, the distance between us was quite large, but we also all knew why we're there, and I think we all trust Jordan in some way. Like you said, Jordan was the linchpin, and therefore, it made the conversations always productive, and nobody ever got stuck. I mean, it's kind of crazy. Nobody got stuck. Nobody started arguing.
No one
It
got
it never happened.
partisan or, ossified ideologically. Look, I mean, at baseline, so many of us, if you knock off the like 5 to 10% of psychopaths, dark tetrad psychopaths on the far left and the far right, we agree on so many things. It's preposterous. Like the amount of time, it's like, do we want, safety and love and family and community and a future? Like there's so many things that are in common. And I feel like we're algorithmically and culturally and partisanly powered to just squabble constantly over the things that are slight disagreements and to blow that up into more and more of each other. And in so many ways, it was just a reminder to me that if you have goodwill and you have people who are coming in good faith, you can discuss all sorts of complicated, sacred topics and also come out differently. And so, I definitely wrote Antihero coming out of Exodus. There was a lot of that stuff was on my mind about how do we integrate kind of the symbolic and the secular world, which I think is the biggest thing we have to bring back together to avoid major kinds of chaos. And what is the wisdom embedded in the thing that's beneath all of it, which is in stories that are sacred. And so I think it definitely pulled my writing in a direction of thinking about how to integrate that in this ongoing narrative.
Well, I mean, maybe that leads me to the next. To me, it's like the big question of what it is that's going on now. I think a lot of people feel like storytelling is exhausted. It feels a little bit that way. We look, we scroll Netflix, we have no idea like what to watch. We have no idea where to look in terms of finding stories that are compelling, that are human, that aren't, ideologically captured. And so I'd like to hear what's your sense of that? Like, what do you think the future or the present of storytelling is? Where do you think that the interesting threads are, you could say?
Well, I'm very much, I've been very adamant to try to hold a line, at least in my own writing, but also in my other work, against ideological capture of the arts. Because, if you're writing, if I'm writing a story and I already know all of how everything's going to go and how everything's going to come out and it all has a neat partisan end, then I'm not creating art. What I'm doing is creating propaganda. And it's the opposite of art, right? Art is the spirit of play, and propaganda is the spirit of persuasion in a lot of ways. And so I've been very vehement about that I would allow it no quarter, in a bunch of different ways, which we don't have to go into. But I am seeing a lot of different traces of things starting to shake out. I'd say the first, and in some ways the most important one, is in humor. I think Chappelle held the line for a really long time, and then you see a lot of other comedians coming in, making jokes about things that were thought to be cancelable, and then it's starting to filter even into, comedies and dramas that people are making fun. You see people starting to joke with each other about ethnic differences. Like there's other stuff that's starting to move through, and I think humor is so important because humor in so many ways, that's what inoculates us. It's a safe way to approach something, to approach a topic that we're supposed to be horrified about. You poke fun at it. I mean, that's why the jester in Shakespeare is the one who can speak truth to the king, because it's veiled in humor. And if it's funny, you should allow it. And you and I have talked a lot about trying to reclaim a lot of the not reclaim, what would we say? Like reconstitute the post-World War II narrative that's been structured and shattered in a lot of ways. And one of the examples I point to a lot that you and I've talked about is like, I don't know if your listeners remember when Prince Harry one time went to a Halloween party and he was dressed as a Nazi.
Yeah.
And everyone freaked out, and it was the whole thing, and he should issue an apology, and it was all over the tabloids. And you and I had this conversation where we thought, well, that's the one time you should dress like a Nazi. It's Carnival, it's Halloween, it's a time where we're supposed to approach dangerous topics or taboo topics and interact with them enough that we don't push them so far into the shadows that the taboo becomes something that's like sacred and darkly sacred and alluring in the wrong way.
Mm.
And I am seeing a return of a lot more humor and open conversations throughout TV and throughout movies. And, there was a movie called, gosh, was it American Fiction? I'm forgetting the name. It was up for an Oscar some years ago about a very intellectual Black professor type who writes a story.
Oh, yeah.
He's very, very literary. He's very, very brilliant, but he writes a story in like Ebonics to like make fun.
Yeah, like just almost like just annoyed, frustrated. Yeah.
And it becomes this bestseller, and then he's stuck in the world of it. And so when we start to see these themes being played with, it's a relief. You can lower your shoulders a little bit because, the worst thing we can have is when we're forcing speech off into the shadows, and we're having this like iron fist because we need to be able to talk about things and joke about things. And we're seeing that in different movies. There was that great Cate Blanchett movie called Tar that deals with this also. And so part of this is, do we deal with it in nuance, right? The answer to woke is an anti-woke. The answer to woke is art or humor or entertainment and things that are genuine and flourishing. And we are seeing more and more of that, and that's one positive. But we do have some work to do, as you and I have talked about at length, in figuring out what the story's going to be now that the kind of post-World War II consensus around a story is starting to wobble.
Yeah. Well, for sure, I'm seeing that you could say the story of rebellion, that basic story, like the Star Wars story, is running out, right? It's just not that people aren't able to pull it off for some reason. And it's very unconscious. Like people try it's also because it's lazy. I think it's at some point when a story begins in culture, like when it kind of lands the first time, then becomes strong, there's a kind of energy to it, right? Where it's exciting and it's new and people are discovering different ways of doing it. But after it's run through its course through, let's say, through the narrative, then it becomes lazy. It's like, well, how do you write a story? Hey, just make it a rebel that goes against authority, and then you've got a story. But at some point,
and the more far from power the rebels are, and the more crushing and omnipresent the group is, the better it is. And I think this is part of what I think we have to do, which is to rejuvenate. We need to look at things and go, well, why don't we not pretend that all big corporations are bad? Why don't we have them be nuanced also? Like the solution is going to be nuance everywhere, because you can't just have like, I'm a whistleblower going up against something. And so, I'm writing, I have a novella out soon called The Delivery. That's a little novella, and it deals with, it's kind of like a Black Mirror adjacent kind of story, though I think it's got a bit more hope and light in it, about a small story who takes this new technology into their home for the sake of getting more luxury in, and then starts to find that there's more limitations and threats that they've allowed through their doorway, like you invite a vampire in almost. But I don't write about AI and technology like it's a uniform evil. We have to write about the complexity of the world all the way around. And part of the thing that we've talked about a lot, that certainly has come up, is we look at a lot of the kind of violent activism, whether that's Antifa, whatever you want to call that. And that's not honoring the true spirit of what like the civil rights movement is supposed to be, for instance, where you take on more responsibility, right? You take on, and you don't ask for anything that's unique to yourself or your own group. You only want equal treatment, and you will shoulder the full responsibility for the repercussions. Not, I'm going to take time off from my, semester at Vassar to go march and protest, but I want school credit for it, and I'm going to scream a whole bunch at everybody. Like, it's the exact opposite. And that inversion results from what you're saying, which is there's an inversion in storytelling too, where the villains are all ascendant. We're like, Wicked is about the Wicked Witch of the West. I played a role in this, also it's very enjoyable as a form until it becomes too much. But, you have Grendel, that's the story of Beowulf told from Grendel's perspective. I wrote the Penguin. I reinvented the Penguin for DC and a lot of the villains, but we're seeing all these villain stories come. And when things go upside down, I think that the nuance isn't to just flip constantly between, black and white, but to try and have something that has all the nuance of the human experience all the way around and through it.
Well, one of the things that, we've been toying with different people around us, and one of the speakers at the Symbolic World Summit, Cale Zeldin, talked about this, which is in some ways the possibility of a return of epic form. Because what you see in epic form is, on the one hand, you see something that has sincerity, which is already a big deal. Like something that isn't ironic, that isn't always kind of just constantly trying
Snarky.
to to be smart about it. Like that there is a kind of sincerity about it, but that it also has a subtlety in it. So if you obviously people who know that if you read the Iliad, you can read it from the point of view of the Greeks, but you also can read it from the point of view of the Trojans, and you can kind of sympathize with both sides. You can kind of understand that, and I think that this has been, even like in terms of American mythology in the Western, this has been, it's one of the possibilities, which is to have a story where you have, let's say, people going out west and encountering native people, but then you can understand both of their positions. Like you can see that there are good people on both sides, there are bad people on both sides. You kind of see a full human drama being played out. You can still understand why they have to fight. Like you can get that. But it seems like that, to me, would be an interesting way to go in terms of storytelling, is to bring back a fuller story, one that isn't just one side or the other in terms of its, and also isn't just ironic.
Well, it's part of what I'm trying to do, I think. I mean, not like this is my primary or conscious aim, but in a lot of ways with the Orphan X saga, I'm trying to turn the conventional thriller archetype and narrative inside out and upside down. And that's been kind of coming to a head across these last couple books.
Yeah, but that definitely you see this kind of full arc where, by the time you start to sympathize with the victims of the assassin, and by the time you actually are forced to question the very impetus of the first books, like why is it he's doing this? What's motivating him? You're really kind of reaching into that depth, you could say, of the epic genre.
That's interesting. I haven't thought about it that way. I always think of the epic in terms of like scope and a sort of expansion of the classic unities of, space, time, action. But you're right that nuance plays a big role. I mean, in that also, and the intricacy of opposing viewpoints. It sort of tries to put its arms around the whole world.
Yeah, for sure. Like if you read the Aeneid, you completely feel for Dido. Like you completely feel crushed, and then you have this weight of duty that Aeneas has to go found Rome. He knows that he has to do this thing, and you don't necessarily have, and even like when you read like the epic poems, like when you read the Divine Comedy, for example, you are meant to have sympathy for several of the people that you encounter in hell. Like you are meant to really feel for them and to wonder, like, why is this necessary? And have that sense. So,
by the way, I mentioned this to you, but it's probably worth listening to your audience. I'm reading this amazing new translation of the Divine Comedy by a poet called Mary Jo Bang, and she holds all the classical references, incredible depth of scholarship, incredible wisdom, but she puts it in a more contemporary language, and she uses some contemporary references. So like Bernie Madoff appears at one point, and like Cartman from South Park appears.
what?
But it's not this like cutesy modern version that dumbs it down. It's just the language, like she'll use Stairway to Heaven will be a phrase that she uses. And then it's like carefully footnoted as a Led Zeppelin thing. I sent you a little passage from it, which you read and you really liked when I first came upon it. And you were like, that's kind of interesting. I like the way the language sounds. And then I bought it and read the Inferno. I'm halfway through Purgatorio now, but it's pretty wonderful.
Well, it's one of the things that people don't realize is that Dante goes some pretty dark places in terms of, he uses very kind of vulgar language in some of the places, especially in Inferno. He used kind of scatological and really street language when the demons speak, for example. Like they're talking like gangsters, basically. If you can imagine in a time today where they have this kind of very violent and vulgar speech. And so often in the translations, you don't necessarily get that because things are translated, in a lofty kind of way. But yeah, definitely I have to look into it more for sure. That's very
We tend
interesting.
to forget that, with Dante. I studied some Shakespeare, and so I get asked about it a good amount. But we forget that this, Shakespeare, he was trying to put butts in seats and sell out the Globe Theater. I mean, he wasn't even writing stuff down for posterity. We have this heightened view of him as one of the greatest artists who's ever lived, but he's modulating humor constantly. If you cut that Globe Theater in half, it's a perfect dollhouse cross-section of Elizabethan society at the time. So he'll make a glancing reference to Ovid's Metamorphosis for royalty, and then he'll make like a drinking impotence joke for the groundlings. Like he's constantly trying to hold everybody in thrall at the same time for the sake of having, what Pixar would call a 4-quadrant film. So
Yeah.
the commercial is part of it, but part of being commercial too is you have to earn. It's funny. So you're earning the reach of your story has to earn the reach as well as the erudition and cleverness. Like it competes evolutionarily also as a story. It has to reach a lot of people. And so we tend to have this fake division now where we're like, oh, well, that's a big best-selling novel. It's really dumb. It's an airport read. Who cares? Or here's this amazing literary short story that somebody wrote on their sabbatical from, Harvard one year that's really, and it's like, well, why not do both? Why not be Dickens? Why not be Faulkner? Why not be, Alfred Hitchcock for film? We never argue over whether Hitchcock was a commercial or a critical success. It's like, why don't let's strive for all of it? And so I think that's a big part of for me. I never like when people talk about like, oh, the book has transcended the genre of crime fiction, because I think crime fiction is an incredible genre. I mean, it can put its arms, not just Raymond Chandler and the geniuses, James M. Cain, Postman Always Rings Twice was an inspiration for Camus' The Stranger. But, Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment is in there. You can do anything within that genre. And so I think that we can take these forms and try to expand them to their fullest self. And the fullest self also means, are they readable? Are they appealing? Are they funny? Is the language contemporary? Is there vernacular? And can you play with character with nuance and themes with great depth?
Yeah.
And so, that's what we're striving for.
That's what we need. We need a new hero. We need a story that can pull people together. It seems like it's not, it sounds, when you say it out loud, it sounds ridiculous. It sounds like, no, it's not possible, but it's happened before. It's definitely happened. I think the Aeneid was explicitly that, for a Rome that was falling apart, for a Rome that was kind of fragmenting at the edges, and the Aeneid was able to pull the empire together. And I think that Dante's Divine Comedy is that too. Maybe a Morte d'Arthur for England, but there are these stories that kind of appear and then start to like pull people together. So I don't know, that's the challenge, I guess.
Well, we strive to, another thing we've talked a lot about is this sort of subsidiary values. What values are on top? And we learn those through stories. I was just on a call today. I was on this call with a bunch of people working in psychological operations and tracking different hostile foreign regime stuff. And, it was being asked about what I think is foundational. And I always come back to this answer, which is we have to join in a shared living story, right? And it has to be one that allows for the West, it has to allow for maximum freedom, right? Because all of our covenants are freely chosen. Even if you go back to Socrates, the Socratic teaching method is that you ask questions and you draw out of the student the wisdom. You don't just tell them everything. Judaism certainly is a freely entered covenant. Christianity, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you just say the words. You have to accept something of free choice, not with a gun to your head. And so there's this setting of conditions that maximizes freedom. And that what's great about that is independent liberty. It means that women have rights. It means that minorities have rights and protections. And a minority can be, an Orthodox Christian at Berkeley. A minority doesn't just mean one thing. It means that there's a host of different ideas that we have to allow for free choice to be made, because that's the way that we gauge goodness. And I think that's, it's a very compelling thing to start to think about, and to think about how in stories we start to rank these values, as opposed to if we're in a political argument, which are so boring in addition to being, torturous. But, it's like there's so many conversations where people are like, here's my little stack of facts. It's like poker chips. Here's my subject matter experts and the op-eds I've read and my peer-reviewed journal articles. And then the next person has theirs and the next person has theirs. And everyone's got their own little stacks, neat stacks of their data and their facts. But you can't organize them without a story, or else we're just a million people with our little stacks of things we've pulled together. And so I think in so many ways, that's one of the things that Jordan overtly has been striving towards, and a lot of us have been rowing in that direction to figure out, what are the ways that those conditions are set, and how do we convey them in ways that are living and breathing and authentic, rather than a bunch of research or overly scolding or, dead because they're filled with ideological possession.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at least my take on this has been, remember, right? This idea that when things are lost and when things, when Jonah is at the bottom of the sea and the fish, that he remembers, right? He remembers the holy place. He remembers God. And that, at least for me, seems to be one of the possibilities. That's why at the outset, and I'm not so sure anymore, we'll see, but at the outset, when I saw that they were doing the Odyssey, the movie coming out, I thought that's what we need. Like, we need to remember, and this father that comes home, like, that's what the story is about. The story is about a father that returns home, a husband that returns home. And I was like, this is what we need. We need this story. I still, a lot of people criticize the casting. You probably followed that, but I'm thinking, I still have some hope, I still have some hope that it's still going to be, it's still going to be.
We don't want to get so cynical and reactionary to everything that any one fact that doesn't fit our narrative wipes something out completely. I mean, look, if Nolan has done, he's a genius. He's done amazing work. Let's see.
He hasn't disappointed me yet, is all I'm saying. That's for sure. It's
funny that we've been talking so much about the Odyssey, because in Nemesis, the last book, Evan is brought to this. He's following his best friend. We won't get into the whole plot here, but it's his best friend grew up in very rural American towns, and he's gone there to kind of get into the trouble and try to kind of protect, but also get in line this pack of boys who've joined a militia who have done some really horrible things. And Evan sits down with his friend Tommy, who's an armorer. He's a former UDT diver, like pre-SEAL Team 6, kind of early plank holder kind of character who gives Evan all of his goods. And they're at odds in this book. And he tells the story about the bed in the Odyssey. And he says that bed that Odysseus comes home to with Penelope, it's the trunk. You remember the base of the bed is the trunk of a tree. And that's what the house is on. And that's what that's the marital bed is the center of the bedroom, is the center of the house, is the center of the town. And that is the thing that he goes on a journey and comes back and returns to. And one of the things this is an example about how imagery moves through us in ways we're not aware of. But one of the things that distinguishes Evan Smoke, my Orphan X character, is he lives in this amazingly modern penthouse. He lives under a fake identity. He's an importer of industrial cleaning supplies.
Yeah.
It's kind of my wink to being a cleaner. But his bed is magnetically levitated. He's very OCD. And so it's a slab of metal that by magnets is 3 feet off the floor, and he's just got a mattress on top of it. So he's sleeping on this place as he sort of is drifting in his Pinocchio not a real boy world that isn't grounded. He's floating between two spaces still.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize why I sort of chose that as a bed for him till I was writing that scene in Nemesis. And I was writing Tommy explaining, because he's saying to Evan, these boys, there's no bed here for them in these towns. They're fatherless boys who are up to all sorts of trouble, and it doesn't excuse them. And it doesn't mean that they're not accountable for what they've done. But there's no foundation here. There's no bed. There's no fathers here.
Yeah.
And so it had this moment where I was like, oh, that's why I wrote that. And it's interesting. You told me once when we talked, I was asking you, some of your symbolic epiphanies are pretty stunning, and we've worked together. And so it's been fun seeing some of those pop up in real time when I ask you, and you stop and you don't really know, and then they're right there. but you said you think of them as these little gifts from God almost.
Mhm.
Like, oh wait, you can see something that of how some symbol connects in a way. And it's funny because sometimes using them in a book, so here I used it a decade now. I've been writing about Evan and his floating bed.
Mm.
And a decade later, here comes this metaphor organically growing out of a book that makes me realize what the point of that was and why
Mm.
that was symbolism that chose me in a way rather than me
Yeah.
choosing it.
Yeah, that's amazing, because one of the things in Nemesis people also have to understand is that the one of the questions that's asked in the book is, what is the root? Like, what is the center? Is it your allegiance to the people that form your community, right? Let's say the love of the people that or is it your principles? Like, what is it that and obviously the answer isn't totally given in the book, right? It's like it's not obvious, because these are things that we all kind of struggle with. Is when do we say this is who I am? Like, this is who I am in terms of my culture, in terms of my religion, in terms of even my ethne, whatever. Like, this is who I am. But then also, this is what I believe. These are the
Yeah.
principles that I hold to.
And you've talked a lot about that too, about saying, one of the things that was fascinating for me in Exodus with the discussion of the center and the fringe. I mean, that was something that captivated me in a lot of ways. But there's all these ways to mediate it. Like, who is it? Is it Miriam who's turned to the
Which
alabaster
becomes like
white?
white because
She judges Moses' wife, who's like very, very dark skinned, right? And so she gets turned like leper white and kicked out of the camp, right, out to the fringe. And it's almost like this joke from God being like, oh, you want to be so pure that Moses can't marry anybody who has a different skin tone? Like, off you go, right? And she has to be out there for a while before she reintegrates. There's all this discussion of it. But in a lot of ways too, I think we've been in this really weird deconstructionist swill, of feeling like we can't take distance, we can't exclude anybody in any way from anything. And you've been very interesting talking about that, because you've said, look, like if you go to a Jewish house and everyone's eating kosher and that's not what I'm going to eat and what I'm going to do, it's exclusionary. If there's a Christian group that's praying in a certain way, like every group by definition has to have some aspect of exclusion that's just definitional. And I think there's this place where, inclusion, that's not a bad value at a school, at a playground, for a team, for a country, for a community. It just can't be the top one. If it's the top value, then nothing can hold. It can't work for a ballet team or a religious group or, any venture. It just can't be the top value. And I feel like in some ways it's worked at us from almost being unable to say, oh, here's this culture that's different from mine. I don't understand it all the way. It's slightly exotic to me. I don't comprehend it fully. And good for that culture, right? There's a lot that goes on in it. There's a lot more that I could learn about it. But the core values that I adhere to, for me as an American, my American identity is very has a lot of primacy for me, right? There's aspects of that culture, whatever it might be, that aren't resonant. They're not going to lead to freedom of speech. They're not going to lead to freedom of religion. They're not going to lead to equal rights for other people, no matter where they are or where they come from. And it's actually okay to note differences and have different opinions about things. And I think that's one of the things we've talked about, because I think, post World War II, the notion of defining things at a national level, like with Hitler, was sort of bound up with Hitler and sunk to the bottom of hell, that we were never allowed to talk about all these things around nationalism. It has such a negative connotation because of its misuse, but it doesn't mean it goes away completely and we can no longer define a core set of values that embody a nation, that it just has to take in and digest every single culture in the whole world. And so we've lost in some ways the ability to even have these discussions about how we integrate and digest things while maintaining the value structure that matters most to us, which tends to be what? I mean, truth, love, self-sacrifice for the long-term betterment of the community, the list of things that let us live and the people around us live the lives in ways that's recognizable to us.
Yeah, and even in terms of this relationship of the center to the fringe, I think one of the things that I really liked in Antihero, there's a great scene. I don't want to give anything away, but there's a great scene where in some ways Evan and his other assassin friend realizes that they're that they're fringe characters, that they're gargoyles, right? That they're not,
They're
and they're
liminal.
like, and they kind of realize that, it's like, well, we actually need some of those. Like, we need us. Like, the characters we play, we actually play a role, but it also means that we can't go inside. It also means that there are some things we don't have access to because we are, in some ways, the fringe of this society. And I think that that's also something that we all always have to recognize, is that being a fringe character has disadvantages and advantages. And being a center character has disadvantages and advantages. And I think that, realizing where we are in certain circumstances, because obviously we're not always the fringe and we're not always the center.
Yeah.
Right? When you go to, if I go to like a friend of mine invites me to his, I don't know, his fraternity or whatever, and then I go there and I'm not part of their group and I'm just an outsider. Obviously, I have disadvantages because I don't know the guys. They don't know me. I'm this weird freak there. But I also have a lot of advantages, which is that I'm also not bound by a lot of the things that bind them. I also have a kind of free roaming possibility. I also have an outsider's view, and I can see things that they can't see about their own reality. And I think that understanding both the advantages and disadvantages of the different roles we play is going to be helpful moving forward. Instead of always understanding the center as, an oppressor, for example, or the center as the only good. And the same with the fringe, either understanding the fringe as being the only thing that's valid because it breaks the rules, or the poor oppressed, fringe, but rather being a little more subtle and seeing how these different roles have they're necessary, but they also have different qualities that you can't ignore,
Yeah, and also it's good that you said that, because I said earlier, like I'm a liberal in the classical sense, and I haven't moved as much, but there's lots of parts of me that are conservative. There's lots of situations I'm in too when I move where, if I'm with you and Bishop Barron in Blackwood, I'm on the liberal end of a spectrum. But then if I'm with like virtually anybody in Hollywood, I'm the conservative in the room quite often. We change and we have different values and we have different things that we move and we accommodate and assimilate. And I think that's right. Part of what fascinated me about creating this orphan program is I have friends who are former SEALs, I have friends who are former spies, and that liminal space, that liminal existence is of so much interest to me, because I love the notion that the government will say, look, here's a black ops program. And what that means is you're beholden to the laws of America, but not really, because you kind of need to go off into and encounter savagery and all sorts of things that we can't fully be aware of what it is that you're doing and what you're engaging with. But the deal is you have to always know what you have your back to, what you're protecting. You're protecting this. You cannot become of the savagery. You can't get lost, right? And we've seen that a lot of times in war and in other scenarios where people get lost too much into the call of the darkness and they forget the responsibility. But there's an aspect that's terribly sacrificial and very, very honorable if you were moving out to face terrible threats, if you were becoming the monster to hunt monsters to protect other people. But you have to remember to stay differentiated from the other monsters.
Yeah. I mean, you think, I always use the example of like, it's a very simple example of a prison guard. It's like a prison guard has more in common with the prisoner than he does with the little old lady that, is going to the grocery. But there always has to be a key distinction between the two. Once that key distinction disappears, then everything falls apart, right? The whole system falls apart and corruption completely flows in. And so you really, like you said, that role of the person standing on the edge and taking enough of the darkness to be able to hold it off is an extremely important one and difficult role to play, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's what Evan's been trying to play that, for 10 years now.
He's been trying to do it, and it's working on him as much as he's working on it. It's funny because there's always that line, if you stare into the abyss stares into you. But I think in some ways, the same things is true of goodness. And Evan's been really trying to figure out how to become more human. He lives, kind of hidden with all these ridiculous people in his apartment who are always tied up with their quotidian concerns and adamant over some ridiculous HOA vote that he gets pulled into for the homeowners association as he's come in from a fight and he's bleeding through his arm. And he saw them a bit cartoonishly earlier, but as he becomes more human, he starts to see all these characters that he's almost dismissive of because they're so ordinary, or they're concerned with whether decaf is going to be offered in the lobby. And he starts to see the ways that they've even taken these risks that he hasn't. Like one of the women is an older woman who's been widowed, and he thinks about the courage she had to spend, so much of her life with somebody and then live with all that grief of the aftermath. And it's a kind of courage that he lacks, even as somebody who goes, unabashedly into a, Muscovite banya to garrote a human trafficker. I mean, he doesn't care. He has all this courage in ways that we think are conventional. But as he starts to become more human and see people as more human, he's aware too of all their hidden strengths and idiosyncrasies and nuances, some of which stack up pretty well against his own.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild because, we talk about those moments. When you're reading the books, obviously, you're reading an Orphan X book because you want to read about a really cool assassin that is like super proficient, kind of like Batman, but, can do everything, and it's amazing to follow that character. But then when I think back about the books, strangely, the moments that stay with me the most are those moments when he encounters the people in his condo that are and that he's trying to, he's just trying to get through the meeting while he's like bleeding on the ground, and is trying to not to let them see them because he doesn't want to break their reality. Here's this big smile.
Well, it's funny. Like, we never get to see Jason Bourne or Jack Reacher go home and have like a real life. And so part of that was I wanted to take him out of these action hero scenarios and then smash them into the real world where we all live. Yeah. And that's really fun. And what we tend to love is always character. Like, if I was to ask you your favorite James Bond action scene, you'd stop and think for a moment, but you immediately know how he takes his martini.
Yeah.
Right. It's sidling up at the bar with somebody. It's being subjected to their humor and their preferences and their tastes. And in a lot of ways, those human elements that are around character are the thing that we gravitate to and come back to again and again, which is obviously, what I hope people do with the Orphan X series.
Yeah. And so I don't know what you're allowed to say, but what's next? What's next for Gregg Hurwitz? What are we going to see after this book?
Well, after Antihero, I'm working on the next Orphan X book, and I have a novella coming out soon. Called The Delivery. I mentioned it earlier. I'm really excited about that. It's the first time I've written a novella. It's my first standalone too in a long time. I've written back-to-back 11 Orphan X books, and I'm writing my 12th. So at least in the prose form, it's really cool for me to be writing and tinkering on something new that really gets at that cross-section of how we contend with and grasp with technology and AI. That was another fun thing you and I did, is when I had that little AI summit at the house where we had some, AI visionaries at the house, and then you there as a kind of resident theologian, which we put in quotes, but, and trying to kind of integrate these different ways of thinking, because in a lot of ways, with the rapidly accelerating change coming from technology, like, our secular brains aren't going to be able to keep up with it if we don't start to understand how to view them symbolically for what's happening, or mythologically what's happening. And so that was something I really got to play around with a lot in The Delivery, which I'm excited about.
Well, definitely looking forward to it. So, Gregg, thanks so much for talking to me. And everybody, get Antihero. You won't be disappointed. It's great. It's great. And it's dedicated to me. So, how can you go wrong? Thanks for that as well. I felt when I saw it, he didn't tell me. And then I just got the reader's copy, and I'm like, just, opening it up. And then I'm like, what? I just see my name in the book, and I'm like, oh, it's very touching. So thank you.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you. And I appreciate you having me on. It's always fun talking with you.
Yeah. Until next time.
Okay.